Are we rolling? Yes, we are. What's up, guys? It's your boy McKinley Crain here, and today I'm going to be doing my spoiler-free movie review of the 1992 comedy film and sequel to Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. Now, before we get started, I would just like to say Merry Christmas. Today, well, the day that I'm filming this video right now is December 25th, 2020, which is Christmas. I've had a pretty good Christmas so far, and I hope you have too, or had, depending on when you're watching this video. Anyway, the reason why I decided to review this movie is because, one, I reviewed the first one yesterday, so, it's only appropriate that I should review the second one. And two, it's Christmas, and, Home Alone 2 Lost in New York is a Christmas movie, so why not review a Christmas movie on Christmas? Anyway, this movie once again stars Macaulay Culkin as Kevin McAllister. This time he's 10 years old. This movie takes place like 2 years after the original took place, which makes sense since this movie was released 2 years after the original was. In this one, Kevin McAllister, instead of being like left actually like home alone like he was in the first movie, he gets stranded in New York alone. And how this happens is he's on a Christmas vacation to Florida with his family. And he basically gets distracted and ends up getting on the wrong plane, thinking that he was following his father, which turned out to be false because he wasn't. And, so he ended up boarding the wrong plane. He ended up boarding the plane to New York, which was separate from the plane to Florida, which was the plane that the rest of his family was on. And when he boarded the plane, he was carrying one of his parents' bags. He was carrying his mother's bag, which had a credit card and, some of her money in there. And he ends up in New York. And, his family had been driving him crazy. So when he got to New York, he decided to, instead of just, contact the authorities, right away, or, the airport people, and just be like, hey, yeah, there was a mistake. Yeah, I'm supposed to be with my family. He decides to, take his own little mini vacation to, and to, this really fancy resort in New York City. And, by the way, when I said that he's going to New York, I meant New York City specifically. So he makes a reservation at a resort, and, he starts, having fun and, going on his own little vacation in New York City and, exploring New York City. That is until he runs into the Wet Bandits, who are Harry and Marv. Harry is played by, he's once again played by Joe Pesci, and Marv is once again played by Daniel Stern, just like in the original movie. And when he runs into them, things start getting wild and, trouble. He starts getting into, a lot of trouble, because they're trying to, get payback on him for, like, you know, for what he did to them in the original, which was, like, you know, like, you know, how he beat them up with all the traps and stuff like that. They're trying to get payback for what he did. Payback on him for what he did to them. And, you know, so basically he has to run away from the wet bandits in this movie, while also, like, you know, stopping them from, like, you know, robbing a toy store in this movie. And it's honestly a really fun watch. This is a very underrated movie. I don't understand why it has, like, a really low score on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, I can't remember what it has on Rotten Tomatoes. It's like a 33%, 29%, somewhere around there. It doesn't deserve that low of a score. It's a great movie. It's not as good as the original movie, but it is a great movie. The story's great. Okay, before I say anything else, this movie's not perfect, but it is a great movie. Nothing in this movie is bad. Everything in this movie is great, but nothing in this movie is perfect. This movie's got great acting. It's got a really fun story. You know, some of the story is, like, recycled. A few elements of the story is, like, are like recycled from the original, but, like, you know, it's like it's the stuff that needs to be kind of, like, you know, brought back from the original. Like, you know, they kind of have very similar stories, but, like, you know, plot stories, but they need to. It's a Home Alone film. And, you know, recycling or reusing some of these plot points from the original and plot stuff from the original, you know, is actually benefits this movie. And, you know, not all of the plot in this movie is recycled from the original. Only a little bit is. You know, a lot of the like, you know, the story in this one is actually very creative, and it's creative in a good way. Like, you know, they could have just, you know, the writers for this movie could have just flat out just had him stay home alone again, like in that same house, and just completely recycled the whole story. But, you know, they did something creative with the story for this movie and had him lost in New York, and, you know, it benefits this movie. You know, this movie actually has a lot of new ideas, and, you know, good new ideas that it benefits from. It's just a really fun film. Macaulay Culkin is great in this movie, as Kevin McAllister, and, you know, he gives a very witty and hilarious performance, just like he did in the original film, even though it's not as good as his performance in the original film. This film as a whole isn't quite as good as the original is, but it's almost as good. Well, isn't quite as great as the original is, but it's almost as great. I really enjoyed this film. It was just a really fun film, and the humor in here is great. The humor in here works, and it's just a really fun film. And, you know, like the first one, a lot of this stuff in this movie isn't very realistic. And, like, you know, one of the main criticisms this movie gets is the fact that, you know, the traps, you know, a lot of the stuff that happens in this movie, like, especially towards the end, is, like, you know, it's totally unrealistic. Like, you know, I know that, like, in the first one, you know, a lot of the traps and stuff like that, like, what happens to Harry and Marv after, like, you know, going through the traps are, like, very unrealistic. Like, you're just like, you know, they should have died or something like that. That would have killed them if this was real life, or that would have paralyzed them, or that would have, like, broken their bones, or, like, crushed their skull or something, or they would literally be unconscious. You know, all that stuff that happens in the first film. Well, this movie, like, you know, this movie just takes it to a whole new level with unrealistic stuff. Like, you know, like pretty much almost every trap in this movie that Kevin McAllister sets for the wet bandits, like that they end up dealing with. Like, you know, you look at and you think to yourself, wait a minute, there's no way in real life that they would ever survive that, or like, you know, not become paralyzed from that. Like, you know, they should have died. Like, you know, this like the first one, this movie is like, you know, very cartoony. It can be very cartoony, but like, you know, it amps the levels of like, you know, cartoonishness and like, you know, unrealisticness. But who cares? I mean, honestly, it's just a movie, and it's not like it's not like, you know, that kind of movie that's like philosophical. Or something like that. It doesn't. These movies aren't made to be realistic. They're just made to be fun to watch. And who cares if the traps aren't realistic? Well, let me rephrase that. Like, you know, what the traps do to Harry and Marv, like the outcomes of the traps. You know, who cares if the outcomes of the traps, or outcomes of the traps, however you want to say it, aren't realistic. You know, they're fun to watch and they're hilarious. You got to remember that this is just a movie. It's not real life, and like I said, this movie isn't supposed to be completely realistic. It's not like, you know, like a biopic that's supposed to like depict like, you know, like an event in history, or like, you know, a celebrity's life or something like that. It's not supposed to do that. It's not supposed to be like realistic or like philosophical or something like that. It's just supposed to be fun and witty, and that's what it is. And it's just a great movie, and I love it, and it's a fun Christmas movie, and it's almost as good as the original, even though it's not. And like the original, it's a fun watch, and I loved it. I had fun watching it, and I would definitely recommend it, unless you're not into this kind of stuff. In that case, this might not be the movie for you, but like, you know, I love it, and I love it. It's a great Christmas movie, and I'm gonna give it an 86% out of 100%, which is the equivalent of an A-. Like, subscribe, join the notification squad. I will return. Oh, and once again, Merry Christmas.